Hey, welcome along again. Sorry, I'm just flipping off out of watch. Welcome along. It's great to have some people here. Great to see you. Great to know that other people are listening. Someone made a comment last week, which reminds me I need to pass that on. Talking about, we're talking a little bit about news services and things like that. And they were just saying that some daytime services, there's some energy around that. So got to pass that on to Janelle and say, hey, your group that's looking at different services, here's a comment. So thank you for those that are watching in. Feel free to comment and I read them. I get a little posting and I can find my way through. I'm still enjoying, I haven't looked so far this week, but one of my midweek Southside Time for Kids, I think it's up around 7,500 views.
Oh.
An average view of like 17 seconds, but somehow I'm starting to get the right algorithm, so I get put in as the next video someone watches, and suddenly my one pops up after it.
Oh, very good.
Silly people. Anyway, that's irrelevant to what we're meant to be talking about. So I thought we'd explore a bit more out of Mike Frost's Mission is the Shape of Water. We talked a bit about this last week, and that sense of mission has changed as the years and the different time periods have gone by. So some things that I thought stood out to me as I'd been reading and as I flicked back through of going, what have I read? Oh, now I've got to find the bit. And so spin the next one. Anyway, I'll keep talking while I flick and look. Is it just proving that males can't multitask? Because I can't flick through.
Rubbish.
Sure I can. So the first period he sort of talks about as being a time when they were sort of taking on the other gods and sort of proving, well, my God is greater than yours sort of thing. And, the whole trying to live within the Roman Empire and all those sorts of things. And that, some of the key things that they did in that period was presenting Christ by appealing to Hebrew scriptures, by using the concept of logos. So this idea of logos or knowledge was out there, and they went, hey, let's explain that. And John's gospel starts with talking about the logos. So that's drawing on some of the Greek thinking and philosophy of the time, by witnessing to their own conversion. So by talking about how they were converted, and you see a couple of times Paul refers back to, the road to Damascus and that encounter with Jesus. And so others were doing that, but that's the one that we're most familiar with is Paul, by demonstrating the Christian life, so by living it out. And the great example of that is always the Emperor Julian, known as Julian the Apostate. So in the 320s, you get Constantine becomes king, and he makes Christianity acceptable. So prior to him, it was sort of a capital offense to be a Christian. He says, no, that's fine. Some people say that he makes it the religion of the empire. He doesn't. That doesn't happen too much later, but he makes it acceptable. His sons follow sort of the line, but they sort of fall into the Arian heresy. So that happens around 323. A member of the church in Egypt called Arius starts teaching that Jesus and the Father are both God, but are in some ways different. And that's where we get eventually Constantine hears about it all, calls the Council of Nicaea, and then we get the Nicene Creed, which is very much Jesus and God are one substance. And if you look at the original, it goes into anyone who follows Arius is anathema and all those sorts of things. So they follow that. And then eventually you get in 331 to 363, the Emperor Julian, known as Julian the Apostate. So he basically tries to, these dates must be wrong, but anyway, he tries to bring back paganism. So he's been taught by some good pagan philosophers, and he tries to go, let's forget this Christian stuff. And he reaches problems. And so he sends this out to the officials. He says, we must pay special attention to this point, and by this means effect a cure for the sickness of Christianity. For when it came about that the poor were neglected and overlooked by the pagan priests, then I think the impious Galileans, or the Christians, observed this fact and devoted themselves to philanthropy. And they have gained ascendancy in the worst of the deeds through the credit they win for such practices. For just as those who entice children with a cake, and by throwing it to them 2 or 3 times, induce them to follow them, and then, when they are far away from their friends, cast them on board a ship and sell them as slaves. By the same method, I say, the Galileans also begin with their so-called love feasts and or hospitality or service of tables, for they have many ways of carrying it out, and hence call it by many names. And the result is that they have led very many into atheism or Christianity, because Christianity doesn't have statues and stuff like that, so therefore must be atheism. Why do we not observe that it is their benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives that have done most to increase atheism? I believe that we ought really and truly to practice every one of those virtues, for it is disgraceful that when the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well, all men see that our people lack aid from us. So Julian's saying, hang on, these Christians are doing all these good things. They're helping the poor. They're doing funerals for those that have lost loved ones and caring about them. There's times when disease goes into cities and everyone flees and the Christians stay there and look after them. And Julian's like, no, us pagans, we should be doing this too. You know, why are we leaving the door open for Christians? Drawing on that idea, a number of years ago, in New South Wales, there was a push to start. So they had what we call RI, what they call SRE, Special Religious Education. And there was a recognition that there were a number of kids not doing that. And that because they were missing out on something, that they would start these ethics classes. So there's a recognition that, you know, the SRE is actually giving something to children that those that aren't doing it are missing out. And everyone went, oh, this is terrible they're doing. And it's like, actually, this is an encouragement. They're seeing that we're bringing something good to the school. And the great irony was there was no reason why the ethics classes had to be run by volunteers, and there was no reason why Christians couldn't volunteer to do that. You can work the system. So yes, so that way of demonstrating the Christian life, as we live out the Christian life, it has an impact. We often think, oh, no, but it really does. They were by attracting the attraction of Christian community. So that sense of, you know, everyone was welcome. Suddenly slaves, women and children were seen as important. That was radical in the Roman world. By the contagiousness of their triumphalism. So the fact that, you know, we've won, we're doing well. So all those things help to share the gospel the first few centuries, and you know, lots of those can still apply today if we're living out the Christian life, if we're sharing our conversions, we're talking about God, if we're bringing people into our community, then that's good. We then move into a time of peacemaking, and he looks at people like St. Patrick. There's the wonderful story of St. Boniface, who goes over to Frisia, sort of northern Germany, and he goes to this area where they have this great oak called Thor's Oak or Donner's Oak, and Boniface sort of goes, oh, well, you think your God's powerful? Grabs an axe and chops the tree down and then uses the wood to build a church. He goes, hey, look at me. I can take you on. But a lot of that period, you start to get missions, and some coming out of England into Europe, helping to bring peace You get the monks starting to bring monastic life and things like that. So that's important. It's not what I wanted to talk about, but that's all right. Then the next period, with the rise of Charlemagne and stuff, you start to get what he calls the flame, carrying the flame. And there's a bit of a sense that for a period, there's a sort of dwindling, Christianity's sort of the main religion of the empire. Everything goes well. The monks are doing well, so they don't have to worry about their rules and stuff so much. Then you start to get a reworking of those, and people starting to come in and say, hang on, no, we need to take this seriously, and we need to do that. And so that sense of, we need to embrace what it means to be Christian. We need to walk alongside people. Then there was the spirit seeking, which we talked about last week a bit. So there was it came after that, that's right. The Moravians, so we talked about them, and the prayer meeting went for more than 100 years. So it didn't just go, so I think what I said last year might have sounded like went for 100 years and then it decided to stop. Went for over 100 years and for some reason it stopped. I couldn't quite find how it stopped, but yes, after 100 years, over a bit. And I noticed that I think there's an article in the current magazine that comes out talking about the new, trying to get a 24/7 prayer thing across the world going. It's not Insights, it's the other thing that comes out. It's in the church. Grab the papery thing. Anyway.
Not Journey, something else you're referring to.
No, not Journey. It's the sort of interdenominational one.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not going to get it. Anyway. Then the next period is wordsmithing. And so that recognition that with the Enlightenment, words become important. And so you have missionaries taking big printing presses. He tells this story of, I think it was in Kenya, and they're moving through and they're making this vast road. Why do they need this vast road? Because they've got to move the printing press down, because this is all important. And he says it's interesting that, a hypothetical young person back in the 1700s would have looked at the world like this, that there was God at the top, then the church, then the king and the nobles, then humans in general, and then nature. So back before the Enlightenment, God's at the top, the church sort of helps us, and then the king, the church and God put the king in place. They rule over us normal people, stuff like that. With the introduction of the Enlightenment, they sort of, and the influence of the Enlightenment renegotiated that worldview, particularly in Protestant countries. The first shift was a reduction in the authority of the church. So, of course, you've got rid of the Pope as the head of the church and all these sorts of things, and suddenly the church loses. So suddenly you've got, God, not really the church, and then the nobles and people and nature. And then, of course, with the Enlightenment, you start to hit the Industrial Revolution and the Age of Revolution. So the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Spanish-American Wars. And so you lose God's still at the top sort of thing. You lose the church, you lose the nobles and the royalty, then you get humanity and nature. And of course, as the Enlightenment goes on, you get that focus on science. So you sort of end up with nature's now most important, then humanity, and then the rest are sort of, we don't really care about them. And so, yeah, I thought that's helpful for us to think through, because that changes, that's part of why, how it affects how we think and how the world thinks. So some points he makes. First, it was assumed that reason was based on the 5 human senses, that which could be physically observed and verified. So if you can show it, if you can prove it, then that logic will make sense. So suddenly those things in the Bible, how do we prove that? Starts to come into question. And you can I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, yes, I hear those comments all the time. How do we believe the miracles? You can't physically believe that. Secondly, Enlightenment era Christians were deeply affected by the elevation of reason and science. So more than just accommodating science and reason, some Christians in the era were deeply influenced by this new thinking. Often voracious readers and believing all truth to be God's truth, they hungrily devoured books on history, geography, science, and languages. So they're starting to get on all this new information, which you can think about. Hey, that's the world we live in now. Suddenly we've got the internet and our world has blown open and we have access to all this information about religions we would never have heard about before. Suddenly I can just go online and discover that. And yes, I'm a Sikh, or yes, I can believe in Scientology. Why you would believe in a religion started by someone who writes science fiction, I'm not sure. That surely gives you a hint that, but anyway, shouldn't say such things, should I? Third point, Enlightenment era Christians developed great confidence in human ingenuity. So it might seem like an ironic outcome, given how deeply aware Christians were of human sinfulness and the evil in society. But even though they held no faith in humanity itself, many came to believe that human ingenuity was capable of solving all manner of problems in the world. So you can sense that's happened, in Enlightenment, so 1700s onwards, sort of thing. And you can see it still has a major impact today. We're still very much, how do we think things through? How do we prove? We can understand all of that. And so you start to get the missionary movement going out, which obviously we know sometimes has some good things, sometimes had some bad things. Some, it's that sense of they did really well, but they did really well because they had a colonizing army with them and supporting them and things like that. But others went against those colonizers. So one of the big things for the missionary movement, or some in it, was social reform. So in Africa, missionaries campaigned to protect land from white settlers. So actually said, hang on, no, we can't just come in and take all these native people's land. In China, missionaries worked to end the opium trade. So it's interesting, he was talking about the opium trade, of course, opium drug, that then became very popular in England. Sherlock Holmes smokes opium a number of times in different books. Opium dens were all around. And apparently there came a point where China, and of course, England's taking all this from China, and then the Chinese start to have this problem of, well, they start taking opium too. So the Chinese government says, no, we're going to stop. We're going to burn all the opium farms. We're going to get rid of this problem. And the English army comes and attacks, saying, hang on, no, you can't get rid of this. And you think, oh dear. So part of our history is we're the drug dealers. I like to think of, Colombia, they're bad, but hang on, England was doing it earlier. So, yes. So some of the missionaries were going, hang on, no, this is a bad thing. We need to stop this. In India, they fought to curtail abuses by landlords. In the West Indies and other colonies, they played key roles in the abolition movement, so stopping of slavery. In Australia and New Zealand, they protected tribes from being wiped out by settlers. And of course, that wasn't everyone. There are some sad things about that missionaries have done, but some of them actually tried to do good things. I think I talked about last week, part of the Moravians were trying to take on the culture that people had when they went, and you continue to see that going through. We might stop there with our little race through. Yes, the next one was again talking about some missionaries who were supporting the people and fighting for human rights, joining in with fighting for liberation and stuff like that. So yes, so that sense of the church has done some great things and it's evolved. We need to keep asking, how are we evolving? And that's part of the changes in the church now. How do we move into this new phase of being the church? What does it mean to do mission? Any comments? Or have I just blabbed on for far too long?
No,
Charlie's
not
nodding,
far
and
too
I
long.
don't know whether that's a yes, you've blabbed on for too long, or I think that's a yes, I blabbed on for too long.
You can judge by the number of comments that come through this week in the appropriate way. I was going to say at the very beginning that statement, "My God is greater than yours," we talked about a couple of weeks ago in that particular Bible reading, where we successfully got the altar to catch the light and to cook the meat. But the one that always struggles me, and it was sort of brought up in that conversation, is my God is greater than yours, or my God is the only God, therefore he is greater than yours. Sort of struggle. Obviously you don't jump in and tell someone you ain't got a real God, but that's that struggle when we make that statement, my God is greater than yours, begins to reinforce within ourselves that there are other gods, as opposed to there is only one God. Others are ways of trying to understand things. Yep. And the fellow in Constantine's time, not Arian, but he was obviously looking at one God, but the one that wanted to go back to paganism was probably going that way too, saying, you bought that's the wrong thing to buy, let's go off and here's another idea that'll be better for you and for me, obviously, because I'm sure he benefited from it. Anyway, I need to go.
Yep. Cool. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to comment. Say Richard talked too much. Let's listen to the others more next week, and we'll do that. Have a good week, everybody. See you later.